NGLI video application for Samantha Hauser, take 3. Hey NGLI selection committee, this is Samantha Hauser, here to answer all of your questions and to give you a bit of a glimpse into who I am as a person speaking through the lens of a video camera. So the first question here, how has God called you to the ministry, the parish, and the United Church of Christ? Well, I would have to say that God called me into the ministry first and foremost by opening my eyes up to the fact that women could be in ministry, simply by allowing a woman minister to be hired into my podunk small town little UCC church, where she brought, Reverend Renee Kohler brought this vitality to the church, which again just opened my eyes to the viability of a woman preacher, a woman standing in the pulpit, speaking the word of God, doing more than just teaching Sunday school, doing more than just volunteering time in the church. And I think that I always knew that my heart would belong to the church in some respect, but again, I had always assumed that it would be, in one of those volunteering roles, or like I honestly had a dream of like becoming this well-renowned famous gospel singer, and then God moved in me and said, no, like actually you are to be a child of God, a woman of God, bringing the word to the people. And so through vulnerability and through open eyes, I was called into the ministry, and yeah, so my call story begins there actually. And knowing the kind of change that could happen in a small parish church, small town, through one woman, really affected how I saw what parish ministry could do to a whole community. And so I think that also sort of influenced how the Spirit was working within me, in my understanding of call, what that was for me. So in regards to the United Church of Christ and how God has called me into this denomination specifically, I feel like I am one of the few, as far as I am aware, sort of people who was born into the United Church of Christ. And I hope it's okay for me to say thank God for that, because I can't imagine, I could not possibly envision myself being within a denomination that is any less inclusive than what the UCC is. I couldn't imagine myself feeling the call to ministry within a denomination, obviously, that doesn't accept women in the pulpit. I couldn't imagine myself being a part of a denomination or being called into ministry specifically within a denomination that's exclusive to people of color, that is less socially active, social justice oriented, I should say, when it comes to immigration rules and regulations and reform. I can't imagine myself being within a denomination or called into ministry within a denomination that would be any less inclusive towards the LGBTQIA. Shoot, I'm gonna get those letters at the end wrong because they're new to me. And so specifically just that inclusiveness that the UCC tries really hard, at least at the national level, and definitely to some degree at the conference level. And I feel like we try to be inclusive at the local level. I feel like that's the calling. That's the calling, is to work towards that inclusion all around. So for number 2, Share your personal vision, mission, purpose statement for your life within the 25-minute time frame. Well, I will start by saying that I believe that there are seasons within everybody's life where that vision, mission, purpose statement changes. And so within this season of my life, I feel like the vision or the purpose specifically that is dwelling within me would be the simple phrase of living with intent. I feel like that's kind of my mantra right now, is just being intentional. Try to live with intent. There's an author, Marianne, I think it's like Radmacher, who wrote a poem recently. When I say recently, God, it could go back to like 2003, actually. That's probably a lot longer than it actually is. But anyway, I'm horrible with dates in case that matters at all. Anyway, back to question number 2. Marianne wrote this poem about living with intent, and it reads something to the effect of like, live with intention and walk to the edge and listen hard. And then there's this part also about like playing with abandonment and remembering to laugh, but also like continue to learn. And I think a big part of the season in my life right now is that living with intent. Because too often I find myself anyway, just kind of going through the day-to-day routine. I have a family that, we have to get through the day. And so we wake up and we get ready and we go through the day, and then I go to work and they go off to school, and then I have to pick them up from school. Then we come home and we make sure everything gets done. But it's really important, I think, to stop and say, like, why are we waking up in the morning? Like, what's the first thing on our mind when we wake up? And how does that affect our heart? Like, whatever we're thinking of, it really does affect us. It makes us who we are. And so why is it that we're doing the things we're doing? Why are we choosing the things that we're choosing? Why do we sit down as a family every evening and have dinner? Why do we choose to watch the shows that we watch, or to read the books that we read, or to say the prayers that we say? All those things. Like, it's really important to be intentional as opposed to just doing them for the sake of doing them. And in that same regards, I try to pull that into the church life as well, to tell people and to ask people, like, why are we doing these things? I get that they might be tradition, but why did they come about? And why are they still important? If we say that they're important, what does that mean, that they're important? Because it's fine if we do things, but it's not fine if we do them just because they've always been done. So living with intent, living with intention, being intentional, that's kind of my mission statement, or my purpose statement for this season of my life. So number 3, choose a biblical text and give specific examples on how it calls you and your congregation to faithful and fruitful ministry. I probably should have looked up the text before I read these and videotaped. I would say, and probably because it's the season of Lent and I've been sitting with this text, actually not this one, but all of the Stations of the Cross text for a while now. But I have been sitting with the text from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, specifically where Simon of Cyrene gets pulled off the hillside or from the crowd, or depending on which gospel you're reading, and is either asked or told, again, depending on the gospel, to help Jesus carry the cross. And the reason that biblical text has been sitting with me so much lately is because oftentimes I serve a church in the Midwest right now, and oftentimes the ethos around here is like, we can do things on our own no matter how hard things get. It's up to us to make them better. and I don't need help from anybody. Even if I do need help, I'm probably not going to ask for it. And that text specifically shows us, like, even Jesus needed help carrying the cross. And we read so often that Jesus says, like, your burdens should be laid on me. I'm here to carry your burdens. But this text shows us, like, no, actually, like, nobody gets to carry their burdens by themselves, not even Jesus. And so, like, a specific example of how we're living into that text, about how we're doing, what's the wording, faithful and fruitful ministry, with that specific text, is that in this community we've been hit really hard with a lot of death. Starting back in September, we had a middle school teacher die a couple of days after having back surgery. He had some complications. And then right before Christmas, we had a couple of sisters get into this huge car accident in Oklahoma. They were away from home traveling, and a semi truck ran them over, and so they died. And they were like this big catering company here in town that did a ton of special events, so they were well known. And then right after Christmas, a very recently retired Lutheran minister who'd been serving the community for, I think, like 42 years, had a sudden heart attack and he died. And even through all of those, we've had a string of suicides going on. And so, like, this heavy cloud of grief and of loss has been hanging over our community. And a lot of people, I think, feel like, I can handle it, it's fine, it's gonna be fine, right? But so our church specifically, and I think a lot of it has to do with going back to my purpose statement and how I've been pushing the church here to say, like, how can we be intentional with our living and with our faith? A few folks at church said, you know, we need to be intentional with this grief because it's heavy around the community. And so they asked, you know, can we have a prayer service of some sorts and make it a community-wide thing, because this isn't just our people who are suffering, but really it's a community-wide thing. And so I got together with the Catholics and the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the non-denominational folk and the Lutherans. And, you know, we created this wholeness and healing service that was a community-wide event. And we basically just talked about how this grief has affected everybody. And so that's a real specific event where the congregation has used that scripture, in my opinion. Obviously, I've not talked to them about the correlation there, but in my opinion, of really, like, seeing people carrying such a heavy burden, like a really heavy cross, and saying, like, you're not alone. Don't try to carry that on your own. We're here as a community to help you carry it, because it's a really hard thing to bear. Okay, so before I start to cry, because that's tough, number 4, let's move on. Number 4, what leadership lessons have proven valuable in your ministry? So I would say probably being intentional, learning to be intentional with the things that I do, and not just being intentional with, like, my family and scripture and stuff, but, like, being intentional with how I delegate. Like, a lot of times I think leaders, it's one of those things where, like, you know, we want to either do it all or we don't want to do anything. We just want to do the one thing that we're good at, and we delegate everything else to people who say that they know how to do it. But I have found that it's really important to kind of sit back and listen and to learn what people's gifts and talents are, and then to be, like, super selective and super intentional with how I delegate. To say, like, you know what, you might think that your gift is, let's say, like sanctuary decorator, because you've been that for the last 5 or 6 years or 20 years maybe. But I think maybe your gift is like hymn selector or something. I don't know a good example of this. Um, but to really like take stock of people's gifts and to be intentional in asking for their help and in delegating the tasks at hand, and also to be intentional in taking on the tasks that I know that I am good at, and even sometimes the tasks that I know I'm bad at, but that I feel like it's important that I learn how to grow in. So I think that intentionality is a good leadership lesson, and also, of course, the delegation part. That's always um, that's always really valuable, and I think a lot of times, for me anyway, I probably don't delegate enough, but that's a challenge. It's a growing edge, as my conference minister likes to call it. All right. I want to back up. Another leadership lesson, I think, kind of goes along with what I mentioned about the intentional thing, but like just being able to listen to people. Um, I'm assuming that this is not like just Midwesterny thing, but maybe it is. Like, people have so many layers to them, and um I think that like learning how to be vulnerable with people, especially for young clergy, it's really, I have found that it is really challenging for people to learn how to be vulnerable with me because I'm so young. Like, it's hard for them to trust that I'll understand the things that are happening in their life. Like, there are some things that it's easy for folks to be vulnerable with me about, but there are other things that they're going through that once they do open up and do become vulnerable with me about, and I can be their pastor to them because I've sat and listened and have been intentional in that practice of listening, then it's sort of eye-opening for them to be able to say, oh my gosh, like, you actually can empathize, or at least exude some level of understanding in this particular area. So yeah, the leadership lesson of just being patient, and having open ears and an open heart to folks in their vulnerability. Okay, so number 5. Oh, what spiritual practices do you engage in that deepen your faith and nurture your resiliency for ministry? Okay. So actually that goes right into like, or goes back, I guess, to what I was just talking about with the listening. One of the spiritual practices that I've been doing for probably the last 3 years, thanks to a colleague of mine, is centering prayer. I am surprisingly good at sitting and just doing absolutely nothing, which I never thought that I'd be good at doing that. But I find that it helps me to really like just be still in the chaos of everything, in the like times of conflict within the church, or the times of turmoil within the community, or if there's things going on that are just like, even if it's just like the busyness of my own life, like finding and specifically like carving out space to do centering prayer. It is so important for me, and to like deepen my faith and nurture my resiliency for ministry. Sorry, I was rereading the question, so I made sure I answered it. I find that it deepens my faith because it helps me to understand myself better. It allows me to just be still and to really think things through in a way that I wouldn't be able to if I was constantly just letting my brain go and go and go, or if I was constantly just like chatting with people about what the problem is and how we might solve it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to watch this back and make sure I answer the question fully. Okay, so number 6. What would it look like for a cohort of colleagues to encourage and challenge one another in ministry? So I feel like and have heard by 100% of my colleagues who are in NGLI that it would be amazing. The exact words that have been used by a handful of my colleagues have been like stupendous, amazeballs, completely, I can't remember exact terminology, but like something that is definitely worthwhile. To me, it it would be really important to just be a part of a group that can sit down and be vulnerable with each other, be willing to actively listen. Because I have found in a lot of the clergy groups that I'm geographically bound to, or that I'm put into for other various reasons. I can't really think of any other reasons other than geography. It's really difficult to find a good balance between the encouragement aspect and like the challenging aspect, because it's normally like way more one or way more the other. And I think it would, for me, it would look like a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven, honestly, to be a part of a group that could just sit and actively participate in listening sessions to one another, and also give some real critical criticism of whatever might need to be given, of the ministry that's being engaged in. So, I mean, I just have heard such good things about the NGLI cohorts that I hope and pray, like wholeheartedly hope and pray, that I have answered these questions well enough to be selected. So, selection committee, please consider me for this. Again, my name's Samantha Hauser, and I hope that I can be a part of this cohort. So, blessed Holy Week, and an even more blessed Easter. See ya.